If I had been astonished at first catching a glimpse of so outlandish an individual as Queequeg circulating among the polite society of a civilized town, that astonishment soon departed upon taking my first daylight stroll through the streets of New Bedford. In thoroughfares nigh the docks, any considerable seaport will frequently offer to view the queerest-looking nondescripts from foreign parts. Even in Broadway and Chestnut Streets, Mediterranean mariners will sometimes jostle the affrighted ladies. Regent Street is not unknown to Lascars and Malays, and at Bombay, in Apollo Green, live Yankees have often scared the natives. But New Bedford beats all water streets in Wapping. In these last-mentioned haunts you see only sailors, but in New Bedford, actual cannibals stand chatting at street corners. Savages, outright, many of whom yet carry in their bones unholy flesh. It makes a stranger stare. But besides the Fijians, Tongataboras, Aramagoians, Panageans, and Brigands, and besides the wild specimens of the whaling craft which unheed reel about the streets, you will see other sights still more curious, certainly more comical. There weekly arrive in this town scores of green Vermonters and New Hampshire men, all athirst for gain and glory in the fishery. They are mostly young, of stalwart frames, fellows who have felled forests and now seek to drop the axe and snatch the whale lance. Many are as green as the Green Mountains whence they came. In some things you would think them but a few hours old. Look there. That chap strutting around the corner. He wears a beaver hat and swallow-tailed coat, girdled with a sailor belt and sheath knife. Here comes another, with a sou'wester and a bombazine cloak. No town-bred dandy will compare with a country-bred one. I mean a downright bumpkin dandy, a fellow that, in the dog days, will mow his 2 acres in buckskin gloves for fear of tanning his hands. Now, when a country dandy like this takes it into his head to make a distinguished reputation and joins the great whale fishery, you should see the comical things he does upon reaching the seaport. In bespeaking his sea outfit, he orders bell buttons to his waistcoat, straps his canvas trousers. Poor hayseed! How bitterly these will burst, those straps, in the first howling gale, when thou art driven, straps, buttons and all, down the throat of the tempest. But think not that this famous town has only harpooners, cannibals, and bumpkins to show her visitors. Not at all. Still, New Bedford is a queer place. Had it not been for us whalemen, that tract of land would this day perhaps have been in as howling condition as the coast of Labrador. As it is, parts of her back country are enough to frighten one, they look so bony. The town itself is perhaps the dearest place to live in all New England. It is a land of oil, true enough, but not like Canaan, a land also of corn and wine. The streets do not run with milk, nor in the springtime do they pave them with fresh eggs. Yet in spite of this, nowhere in all America will you find more partisan-like houses, parks and gardens more opulent than in New Bedford. Whence came they? How planted upon this once scraggy scoria of a country? Go and gaze upon the iron epimetical harpoons round yonder lofty mansions, and your question will be answered. Yes, all these brave houses and flowery gardens came from the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. One and all, they were harpooned and dragged up hither from the bottom of the sea. Can Herr Alexander perform a feat like that? In New Bedford, fathers, they say, give whales for dowries to their daughters and portion off their nieces with a few porpoises apiece. You must go to New Bedford to see a brilliant wedding, for, they say, they have reserves of oil in every house, and every night recklessly burn their lengths in spermaceti candles. In summertime, the town is sweet to see, full of fine maples, long avenues of green and gold. And in August, high in air, the beautiful and bountiful horse chestnuts, candelabra-wise, proffer the passer-by their tapering upright cones of congregated blossoms. So omnipotent is art, which in many a district of New Bedford has superinduced bright terraces of flowers upon the barren refuse rocks thrown aside at creation's final day. And the women of New Bedford, they bloom like their own red roses. But roses only bloom in summer, whereas the fine carnations of their cheeks is perennial as sunlight in the seventh heavens. Elsewhere match that bloom of theirs ye cannot, save in Salem, where they tell me the young girls breathe such musk their sailor sweethearts smell them miles offshore, as though they were drawing nigh the odorous Molocus instead of the Prutinic sand. In this same New Bedford there stands a whaleman's chapel, and few are the moody fishermen, shortly bound for the Indian Ocean or Pacific, who failed to make a Sunday visit to the spot. I am sure that I did not. Returning from my first morning stroll, I again sallied out upon this special errand. The sky had changed from clear, sunny cloud to driving sleet and mist. Wrapping myself in my shaggy jacket of the cloth called bearskin, I fought my way against the stubborn storm. Entering, I found a small, scattered congregation of sailors and sailors' wives and widows. A muffled silence reigned, only broken at times by the shrieks of the storm. Each silent worshipper seemed purposely sitting apart from the other, as if each silent grief was insular and incommunicable. The chaplain had not yet arrived, and there these silent islands of men and women sat steadfastly eyeing several marble tablets with black borders masoned on the wall on either side of the pulpit. 3 of them ran something like the following, but I do not pretend to quote. Sacred to the memory of John Talbot, who, at the age of 18, was lost overboard near the Isle of Desolation off Patagonia, November 1st, 1836. This tablet is erected to his memory by his sister. Sacred to the memory of Robert Long, Willis Ellery, Nathan Coleman, Walter Canny, Seth Macy, and Samuel Gleig, forming one of the boat's crews of the ship Eliza, who were towed out of sight by a whale on the offshore ground in the Pacific, December 31st, 1839. This marble is here placed by their surviving shipmates. Sacred to the memory of the late Captain Ezekiel Hardy, who in the bows of his boat was killed by a sperm whale on the coast of Japan, August 3rd, 1833. This tablet is erected to his memory by his widow. Shaking off the sleet from my ice-glazed hat and jacket, I seated myself near the door, and turning sideways was surprised to see Queequeg near me. Affected by the solemnity of this scene, there was a wandering gaze of incredulous curiosity in his countenance. The savage was the only person present that seemed to notice my entrance, because he was the only one who could not read, and therefore was not reading those frigid inscriptions on the wall. Whether any of the relatives of the seamen whose names appeared there were now among the congregation, I knew not. But so many are the unrecorded accidents in the fishery, and so plainly did several women present wear the countenance, if not the trappings, of some uncreasing grief, that I feel sure that here before men were assembled those in whose unhealing hearts of the sight of these bleak tablets sympathetically caused the old wounds to bleed afresh. Oh, ye whose dead lie buried beneath the green grass, who standing among flowers can say, Here, here lies my beloved, ye not know the desolation that broods in bosoms like these. What bitter blanks in those black boarded marbles which covered no ashes. What despair in those immovable inscriptions. What deadly voids and unbidden infidelities in the lines that seem to gnaw upon all faith and refuse resurrections to the beings that were placelessly perished without a grave. As well might those tablets stand in the cave of Elephantra as here. In what census of living creatures the dead of mankind are included? Why is it that a universal proverb says of them that they tell no tales, though containing more secrets than the Goodwin Sands? How is it that his name, who yesterday departed for the world, we prefix so significant and infidel a word, and yet do not thus entitle him, if he but embarks for the remotest Indies of this living earth? Why the life insurance companies pay death forfeitures upon immortals, In what eternal, unstirring paralysis and deadly, hopeless trance yet lies antique Adam, who died 60 round centuries ago? How is it that we still refuse to be comforted, for those who we nevertheless maintain are dwelling in unspeakable bliss? Why are all the living so strive to hush all the dead? Wherefore but the rumor of a knocking in a tomb will terrify a whole city. All these things are not without their meanings. But faith, like a jackal, feeds among the tombs, and even from these dead doubts she gathers her most vital hope. It need scarcely be told with what feelings on the eve of Nantucket voyage I regarded these mournful tablets, and by the murky light of that darkened, doleful day read the fate of the whalemen who had gone before me. Yes, Ishmael, the same fate may be thine, but somehow I grew merry again. Delightful inducements to embark, fine chance for promotion, it seems. Aye, a stove boat will make me an immortal by brevet. Yes, there is death in this business of whaling, a speechlessly quick, chaotic bundling of a man into eternity. But what then? Methinks we have hugely mistaken this matter of life and death. Methinks that what they call my shadow here on earth is my true substance. Methinks that in looking at things spiritual we are too much like oysters observing the sun through the water and thinking that thick water the thinnest of air. Methinks my body is but the lees of my better being. In fact, take my body who will, take it, I say, it is not me. And therefore 3 cheers for Nantucket, and come a stove boat and stove body when they will, for stave my soul Jove himself cannot. I had not been seated very long ere a man of a certain venerable robustness entered. Immediately, as the storm-pelted door flew back upon admitting him, a quick, regardful eyeing of him by all the congregation sufficiently attested that this fine old man was the chaplain. Yes, it was the famous Father Maple, so called by the whalemen, among whom he was a very great favorite. He had been a sailor and a harpooner in his youth, but for many years past had dedicated his life to the ministry. At the time I now write of, Father Maple was in the hardy winter of a healthy old age, that sort of old age which seems merging into a second flowering youth, for among all the fissures of his wrinkles there shone certain mild gleams of a newly developing bloom, the spring verdure peeping forth even beneath February's snow. No one having previously heard his history could for the first time behold Father Maple without the utmost interest, because there were certain engrafted clerical peculiarities about him, imputably to that adventurous maritime life he had led. When he entered, I observed that he carried no umbrella, and certainly had not come in his carriage, for his trapulin hat ran down with melting sleet, and his great pilot cloth jacket seemed almost to drag him to the floor with the weight of the water it had absorbed. However, hat and coat and overshoes were one by one removed and hung up in a little space in an adjacent corner. When arrayed in a decent suit, he quietly approached the pulpit. Like most old-fashioned pulpits, it was a very loft one, and since irregular stairs to such a height would, by its long angle with the floor, seriously contract the already small area of the chapel, the architect, it seemed, had acted upon the hint of Father Maple and finished the pulpit without stairs, substituting a perpendicular side ladder like those used in mounting a ship from a boat at sea. The wife of a whaling captain had provided the chapel with a handsome pair of red worsted man ropes for this ladder, which, being itself nicely headed and stained with a mahogany color, the whole contrivance, considering what manner of chapel it was, seemed by no means in bad taste. Halting for an instant at the foot of the ladder, and with both hands grasping the ornamental knobs of the man ropes, Father Maple cast a look upwards, and then with a true sailor-like but still reverential dexterity, hand over hand mounted the steps as if ascending the main top of his vessel. The perpendicular parts of this side ladder, as is usually the case with swinging ones, were of cloth-covered rope, only the rounds were of wood, so that at every step there was a joint. At my first glimpse of the pulpit, it had not escaped me that, however convenient for a ship, these joints in the present instance seemed unnecessary. For I was not prepared to see Father Maple, after gaining the height, slowly turned round and, stooping over the pulpit, deliberately drag the ladder step by step till the whole was disposited within, leaving him impregnable in his little Quebec. I pondered some time without fully comprehending the reason for this. Father Maple enjoyed such a wide reputation for sincerity and sanctity that I could not suspect him of courting notoriety by any mere tricks of the stage. No, thought I, there must be some sober reason for this thing. Furthermore, it must symbolize something unseen. Can it be, then, that by that act of physical isolation he signifies his spiritual withdrawal for the time from all outward worldly ties and connections? Yes, for replenished with the meat and wine of the world to the faithful man of God, this pulpit, I see, is a self-containing stronghold, a lofty Erebritzian, with a perennial well of water within the walls. But the side ladder was not the only strange feature of the place, borrowed from the chaplain's former seafarings. Between the marble centiphs and other hand of the pulpit, the wall which formed its back was adorned with a large painting representing a gallant ship beating against a terrible storm off a lee coast of black rocks and snowy breakers. But high above the flying scud and dark rolling clouds there floated a little isle of sunlight from which beamed forth an angel's face. And this bright face shed a distinct spot of radiance upon the ship's tossed deck, something like that silver plate now inserted into the Victory's plank where Nelson fell. "Ah, noble ship," the angel seemed to say, beat on, thou noble ship, and bear a hardy helm, for lo, the sun is breaking through, the clouds are rolling off, serenest azure is at hand." Nor was the pulpit itself without a trace of the same sea taste that had achieved the ladder in the picture. Its paneled front was in the likeness of a ship's bluff bows, and the Holy Bible rested on a projecting piece of scrollwork, fashioned after a ship's fiddle-headed beak. What could be more full of meaning? For the pulpit is ever this earth's foremost part. All the rest comes in its rear. The pulpit leads the world. From thence it is the storm of God's quick wrath is first descried, and the bow must bear the earliest brunt. From thence it is the god of breezes fair and fallow is first invoked for favorable winds. Yes, the world's a ship on its passage out, and not a voyage complete, and the pulpit is its prow. Father Maple rose, and in a mild voice of unassuming authority ordered the scattered people to condense.
"Starboard, gangway there. Side away to larboard. Larboard, gangway to starboard. Midships, midships."
There was a low rumbling of heavy sea boots among the benches, and a still slighter shuffling of women's shoes, and all was quiet again, and every eye on the preacher. He paused a little, then kneeling at the pulpit's bows, folded his large brown hands across his chest, uplifted his closed eyes, and offered a prayer so deeply devout that he seemed kneeling and praying at the bottom of the sea. This ended in prolonged solemn tones, like the continual tolling of a bell in a ship that is foundering at sea in a fog. In such tones, he commenced reading the following hymn, but, changing his manner towards the concluding stanzas, burst forth with appealing exultation and joy.
"The ribs and terrors in the whale arched over me a dismal gloom, while all God's sunlit waves rolled by and left me deepening down to doom. I saw the opening maw of hell with endless pains and sorrows there, which none but they that feel can tell. Oh, I was plunging to despair. In black distress I called my God, when I could scarcely believe him mine. He bowed his ear to my complaints, no more the whale did me confine. With speed he flew to my relief, as in a radiant dolphin bore. Awful, yet bright as lightning shone the face of my deliverer God. My song forever shall record that terrible, that joyful hour. I give the glory to my God, his all the mercy and the power."
Nearly all joined in singing this hymn, which swelled high above the howling of the storm. A brief pause ensued. The preacher slowly turned over the leaves of the Bible and at last, folding his hands down upon the proper page, said,
"Beloved shipmates, clinch the last verse of the first chapter of Jonah. And God had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah." Shipmates, this book, containing only 4 chapters, 4 yarns, is one of the smallest strands in the mighty cable of the scriptures. Yet what depths of the soul does Jonah's deep sea line sound? What a pregnant lesson to us is this prophet. What a noble thing is that canticle in the fish's belly. How billow-like and boisterously grand. We fell the flood surging over us. We sound with him in the kelpy bottom of the waters. Seaweed and all the slime of the sea is about us. But what is this lesson that the book of Jonah teaches? Shipmates, it is a 2-stranded lesson. A lesson to us all as sinful men, and a lesson to me as a pilot of the living God. As sinful men, it is a lesson to us all because it is a story of the sin, hard-heartedness, suddenly awakened fears, the swift punishment, repentance, prayers, and finally the deliverance and joy of Jonah. As with all sinners among men, the sin of the son of Amittai was in his willful disobedience of the command of God, never mind now that that command was, or how conveyed, which he found a hard command. But all the things that God would have us do are hard for us to do. Remember that. And hence, he oftener commands us than endeavors to persuade, and if we obey God, we must disobey ourselves. And it is in this disobeying ourselves wherein the hardness of obeying God consists. With this sin of disobedience in him, Jonah still further flouts at God by seeking to flee from him. He thinks that a ship made by men will carry him into countries where God does not reign, but only the captains of this earth. He skulks about the wharves of Joppa and seeks a ship that's bound for Tarshish. There lurks perhaps a hitherto unheeded meaning here. By all accounts, Tarshish could be no other city than the modern Cadiz. That's the opinion of learned men. And where is Cadiz, shipmates? Oh, Cadiz is in Spain, as far by water from Joppa as Jonah could possibly have sailed in those ancient days, when the Atlantic was an almost unknown sea. Because Joppa, the modern Jaffa, shipmates, is in the most easterly coast of the Mediterranean, the Syrian, and Tarshish, or Cadiz, more than 2,000 miles to the westward from that, just outside the Straits of Gibraltar. See ye not then, shipmates, that Jonah sought to flee worldwide from God? Miserable men, most contemptible and worthy of all scorn, with slouched hat and guilty eyes skulking from his God, prowling among the shipping like a vile burglar hastening to cross the seas. So disordered, so self-condemning is his look that there had been policemen in those days. Jonah, on mere suspicion of something wrong, had been arrested ere he touched a deck. How plainly he's a fugitive. No baggage, not a hat box, valise, or carpet bag, no friends accompanying him to the wharf with their adieus. At last, after much dodging search, he finds the Tarshish ship receiving the last items of her cargo, and as he steps on board to see its captain in the cabin, all the sailors for the moment desist from hoisting in the goods to mark the stranger's evil eye. Jonah sees this, but in vain he tries to look all ease and confidence. In vain essays his wretched smile. Strong intuitions of the men assure the mariners he can be no innocent. In their game-some, but still serious way, one whispers to the other, "Jack, he's robbed a widow," or "Joe, do you mark him? He's a bigamist," or "Harry, lad, I guess that's the adulterer that broke jail in old Gomorrah," or be like one of the missing murderers in Sodom. Another runs to read the bill that's struck against the spile upon the wharf to which the ship is moored, offering 500 gold coins for the apprehension of a parricid and containing a description of his person. He reads and looks from Jonah to the bill, while all his sympathetic shipmates now crowd round Jonah, prepared to lay their hands upon him. Frightened, Jonah trembles, and summoning all his boldness to his face, only looks so much more a coward. He will not confess himself suspected, but that itself is a strong suspicion, so he makes the best of it, and when the sailors find him not to be the man that is advertised, they let him pass, and he descends into the cabin. "Who's there?" cries the captain, as his busy desk hurriedly making out his papers for the customs. "Who's there?" Oh, How that harmless question mangles Jonah. For the instant he almost turns to flee again, but he rallies. "I seek a passage on this ship in Tarshish. How soon sail ye, sir?" Thus far the busy captain has not looked up to Jonah, though the man now stands before him. But no sooner does he hear that hollow voice than he darts a scrutinizing glance. "Well, we sail with the next coming tide," at last he slowly answered, still intently eyeing him. "No sooner, sir? Soon enough for any honest man that goes a passenger." Ha! Jonah, another stab. But he swiftly calls away the captain from that scent. "I'll sail with ye," he says. "The passage money, how much is it? I'll pay it now." For it is particularly written, shipmates, as if it were a thing not to be overlooked in this history, that he paid the fare thereof ere the craft did sail. And taken with the context, this is full of meaning. Now Jonah's captain, shipmates, was one of those discernment detects crime in any, but whose cupidity exposes it only in the penniless. In this world, shipmates, sin that pays its way can travel freely and without a passport, or as virtue if a pauper is stopped at all fronts. So Jonah's captain prepares to test the length of Jonah's purse ere he judge him openly. He charges him thrice the usual sum, and it's assented to. Then the captain knows that Jonah is a fugitive, but at the same time resolves to help a flight that paves its rear with gold. Yet when Jonah fairly takes out his purse, prudent suspicions still molest the captain. He rings every coin to find a counterfeit. Not a forger anyway, he mutters, and Jonah is put down for his passage. "Point out my stateroom, sir," says Jonah now. "I'm travel-weary, and I need sleep." "Thou lookest like it," says the captain. "There's thy room." Jonah enters, and would lock the door, but the lock contains no key. Hearing him foolishly fumbling there, the captain laughs slowly to himself and mutters something about the door of convict cells being never allowed to be locked within. All dressed and dusty as he is, Jonah throws himself into his berth and finds the little stateroom ceiling almost resting on his forehead. The air is closed and Jonah gasps. Then, in that contracted hole sunk too beneath the ship waterline, Jonah feels the heralding presentments of that stifling hour when the whale shall hold him in the smallest of his bowels wards. Screwed as it is, axis against the side, a swinging lamp slightly oscillates in Jonah's room, and the ship, heeling over towards the wharf with the weight of the last bales received the lamp, flame and all through in silent motion, still maintains a permanent obliquity with reference to the room. Though in truth, infallibly straight itself, it but made obvious the false lying levels among which it hung. The lamp alarms and frightens Jonah, as laying in his berth his tormented eyes rolled round the place, and this thus far successfully fugitive finds no refuge for his restless gaze. But that contradiction in the lamp more and more appalls him. The floor, the ceiling, and the side are all awry. "Oh, so my conscience hangs me," he groans, "straight upwards so it burns, but the chambers of my soul are all in crookedness." Like who after a night of drunken revelry hides in his bed still reeling, but with conscience yet prickling him, as the plungings of the Roman racehorse, but so much the more strike his steel tags into him. As one who in that miserable plight still turns and turns in giddy anguish, praying God for annihilation until the fit be past. And at last, amid the whirl of woe he feels a deep stupor steals over him as over the man who bleeds to death, for conscience is the wound, and there's not to staunch it, so after sore wrestlings in his berth, Jonah's prodigy of ponderous misery drags him drowning down to sleep. And now the time of the tide has come. The ship casts off her cables, and from the deserted wharf the uncheered ship for Tarshish, all careening, glides to sea. That ship, my friends, was the first of recorded smugglers. The contraband was Jonah. But the sea rebels he will not bear the wicked burden. A dreadful storm comes in, the ship is like to break. But now, when the boatswain calls all hands to lighten her, when boxes and bales and jars are clattering overboard, when the wind is shrieking and the men are yelling, and every plank thunders with trampled feet right over Jonah's head, in all this raging tumult, Jonah sleeps his hideous sleep. He sees no black sky and raging sea, feels not the reeling timbers, and little hears he, or heeds he the far rush of the mighty whale, which even now with open mouth is cleaving the seas after him. Aye, shipmates, Jonah has gone down into the side of the ship, a berth in the cabin as I've taken it, and was fast asleep. But the frightened master comes to him, and shrieks in his dead ear, "What meanest thou, O sleeper? Arise!" Startled from his lethargy by that direful cry, Jonah staggers to his feet, and stumbling to the deck, grasps a shroud to look out upon the sea. But at that moment he is sprung upon by a panther billow leaping over the bulwarks. Wave after wave thus leaps into the sea, and finding no speedy vent, runs roaring afore and aft till the mariners come nigh to drowning while yet afloat. And yet, as the white moon shows her affrighted face from the steep gullies in the blackness overhead, aghast, Jonah sees the rearing bowsprit pointing high upward, but soon beat downward again towards the tormented deep. Terrors upon terrors run shouting through his soul. In all his cringing attitudes, the god fugitive is now too plainly known. The sailors mark him. More and more certain grow their suspicions of him, and at last, fully to test the truth by referring to whole matter to high heaven, they fall to casting lots, to see for whose cause this great tempest was upon them. The lot is Jonah's. That discovered, then how furiously they mob him with their questions. What is thine occupation? Whence comest thou? Thy country? What people? But mark now, my shipmates, the behavior of poor Jonah. The eager mariners but ask him who he is and where from, whereas they not only receive an answer to those questions, but, likewise, another answer to a question not put by them. But the unsolicited answer is forced from Jonah by the hand of God that is upon him. "I am a Hebrew," he cries, and then, "I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who hath made the sea and the dry land." Fear him, O Jonah? Aye, well mightest thou fear the Lord God then. Straightway he now goes on to make a full confession, whereupon the mariners become more and more appalled, but still are pitiful. For when Jonah, not yet supplicating God for mercy, since he but too well knew the darkness of his deserts, when wretched Jonah cries out for them to take him and cast him forth into the sea, for he knew that for his sake the great tempest was upon them, they mercifully turn from him and seek by other means to save the ship. But all in vain. The indignant gale howls louder. Then with one hand raised invokingly to God, and the other they not unreluctantly lay hold of Jonah. And now behold, Jonah taken up as an anchor and dropped into the sea, when instantly an oily calmness floats out from the east, and the sea is still as Jonah carries down the gale with him, leaving smooth water behind. He goes down into the whirling heart of such a masterless commotion that he scarce heeds the moment when he drops seething into the yawning jaws awaiting him, and the whale shoots to all his ivory teeth like so many white bolts upon his prison. Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord out of the fish's belly. But observe his prayer, and learn a weighty lesson. For sinful as he is, Jonah does not weep and wail for direct deliverance. He feels that his dreadful punishment is just. He leaves all his deliverance to God, contenting himself with this, that, spite of all his pains and pangs, he will still look towards his holy temple. And here, shipmates, is true and faithful repentance, not clamorous for pardon, but grateful for punishment. And how pleasing to God was this conduct in Jonah is shown in the eventual deliverance of him from the sea and the whale. Shipmates, I do not place Jonah before you to be copied for his sin, but I do place him before you as a model for repentance. Sin not, but if you do, take heed to repent of it like Jonah.
While speaking these words, the howling of the shrieking, slanting storm without seemed to add new power to the preacher, who, when describing Jonah's sea storm, seemed tossed by a storm himself. His deep chest heaved as with a groundswell. His tossed arms seemed the wearing elements at work, and the thunders that rolled away from off his swarthy brow and the light leaping from his eyes made all his simple hearers look on him with a quick fear that was strange to them. There now came a lull in his look, as he silently turned over the leaves of the book once more, and, at last standing motionless with closed eyes for the moment, seemed communing with God and himself. But again, he leaned over towards the people, and bowing his head lowly with an aspect of the deepest yet manliest humility, he spake these words.
Shipmates, God has laid but one hand upon you, but both his hands press upon me. I have read ye by what murky light may be mine the lesson that Jonah teaches to all sinners, and therefore to ye, and still more to me, for I am a greater sinner than ye. And now, how gladly would I come down from this masthead and sit in the hatches there where you sit, and listen as you listen, while some one of you reads me that other and more awful lesson which Jonah teaches to me as a pilot of the living God. How being an anointed pilot, prophet, or speaker of true things, and bidden by the Lord to sound these unwelcome truths in the ears of a wicked Nineveh, Jonah, appalled at the hostility he should raise, fled from his mission and sought to escape his duty and his God by taking ship at Joppa. But God is everywhere. Tarshish he never reached. As we've seen, God came upon him in the whale and swallowed him down to living gulfs of doom. With swift slantings tore him along into the midst of the sea, where the eddying deeps sucked him 10,000 fathoms down, and the weeds wrapped around his head, and all the watery world of woe bowled over him. Yet even then, beyond the reach of any plummet, out of the belly of hell, when the whale grounded upon the ocean's utmost bones, even then, God heard the engulfed repenting prophet when he cried. Then God spake unto the fish, and from the shuddering cold and blackness of the sea the whale came breaching up towards the warm and pleasant sun and all the delights of air and earth, and vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. When the word of the Lord came a second time, and Jonah, bruised and beaten, his ears like two seashells still multitudinously murmuring of the ocean, Jonah did the Almighty's bidding. And what was that, shipmates? To preach the truth in the face of falsehood. That was it. This, shipmates, this is that other lesson. Woe to that pilot of the living God who slights it. Woe to him who this world charms for gospel duty. Woe to him who seeks to pour oil upon the waters when God has brewed them into a gale. Woe to him who seeks to please rather than to appall. Woe to him whose good name is more to him than goodness. Woe to him who in this world courts not dishonor. Woe to him who would not be true even though to be false were salvation. Yea, woe to him who, as the great pilot Paul has it, while preaching to others, is himself a castaway.
He dropped and fell away from himself for a moment, then lifting his face to them again, showed a deep joy in his eyes as he cried out with heavenly euphemism.
But oh, shipmates, on the starboard hand of every woe there is a sure delight, and higher the top of that delight than the bottom of the woe is deep. Is not the main truck higher than the keelson is low? Delight is to him a far, far upward and inward delight, who against the proud gods and commodores of this earth ever stands forth his own inexorable self. Delight is to him whose strong arms yet support him when the ship of this base, treacherous world has gone down beneath him. Delight is to him who gives no quarter in the truth and kills, burns, and destroys all sin, though he plucks it out from under the robes of senators and judges. Delight, top, gallant delight is to him who acknowledges no law or lord but the Lord, his God, and is only a patriot to heaven. Delight is to him who all the waves of the billows of the seas of the boisterous mob can never shake him from his sure keel of the ages. An eternal delight and deliciousness will be his, who, coming to lay him down, can say with his final breath, O Father, chiefly known to me by thy rod, mortal or immortal, here I die. I have striven to be thine, more than to be this world's or mine own. Yet this is nothing. I live eternity to thee, for what is man that he should live out the lifetime of his God?
He said no more, but slowly waving away a benediction, covered his face with his hands, and so remained kneeling, till all the people had departed, and he was left alone in the place.